My husband kicked me in front of 300 guests at our wedding. What happened next shocked everyone. Please stay with me as I tell my story. And please, do not forget to support our channel by subscribing to our channel, liking our videos, and sharing your loved ones. Your support means the world to us. Now to our story. Poke. Imagine being kicked by the man you just married in front of 300 people on what should have been the happiest day of your life. That was my reality. My name is Emily. I was 27 years old, and I had just said I do to Ryan, the man I thought I would spend forever with. For months we had planned every detail of our wedding. From the flowers to the music, everything looked perfect. I thought I was walking into a fairy tale, but instead, I was stepping into a nightmare. At first, the day felt magical. Friends and family filled the room with laughter. Ryan held my hand as we walked into the reception, and I truly believed I had made the right choice. Everyone clapped, the music played, and it felt like a dream. I remember thinking, this is the beginning of something beautiful. But I couldn't have been more wrong. It started as something small, almost silly. We were on the dance floor, surrounded by people taking pictures and cheering us on. Ryan leaned in and whispered something I didn't quite hear. I asked him to repeat it, and for some reason he became annoyed. I thought he was joking, so I laughed nervously, trying to smooth it over. But his face turned hard. The next thing I knew, in front of every guest, he kicked me. Not a playful nudge, not a gentle tap. He kicked me hard enough that I stumbled. The music didn't stop, but the gasps around us filled the room. My parents stood frozen, mouths open in disbelief. Ryan's groomsmen exchanged awkward looks, unsure if they should step in. The bridesmaids were horrified. I stood there, my cheeks burning, my stomach twisting. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and escape the eyes that were now locked on. Ryan didn't even apologize. He simply brushed it off, as if nothing had happened. He forced a smile, raised his hands like it was some kind of joke, and kept moving. The crowd didn't know how to react. Some guests nervously laughed, others shook their heads, and a few looked away in shame. I stood in my white dress, trembling, my heart breaking into pieces, realizing that the man who promised to love and protect me had just humiliated me in the cruelest way. I couldn't cry, not then. I couldn't scream either. I was too shocked, too numb, too embarrassed. Instead, I forced a smile, pretending I was fine. My whole body shook, but I swallowed the pain and kept going because I didn't know what else to do. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. Because this was only the beginning. What came after that moment was darker, more painful, and far more shocking than anything I could have imagined. This was where the nightmare truly began. After the shocking moment on the dance floor, the wedding reception turned cold. Music still played, but the joy was gone. People whispered at their tables, glancing at me when they thought I wasn't looking. Some guests tried to keep dancing. Others sat quietly, pretending nothing had happened, but the atmosphere had changed. What was supposed to be a night of celebration now felt heavy and uncomfortable. My parents couldn't stay silent. They pulled me aside, their faces pale and tense. My mother grabbed my hands, her voice shaking as she said, "Emily, you don't have to go through with this. We can end it tonight. Annul the marriage before it's too late." My father stood beside her, jaw clenched, trying to keep calm but clearly furious. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes, not fear for himself, but fear for me. I didn't know what to say. My mind was spinning, and all I could feel was shame. This was the man I had just promised my life to. The man I had walked down the aisle for. The man standing across the room smiling as if nothing terrible had happened. My parents' words cut deep, but at the same time, I felt trapped. Hundreds of eyes had watched me say vows, kiss him, and celebrate. Ending it right then felt impossible. Ryan must have sensed the tension because he walked over, putting on his most charming smile. He wrapped his arm around me and said loudly, "It was just a joke gone wrong. Everyone needs to relax." His tone was smooth, practiced, as if he could convince the entire room that what they saw didn't matter. He leaned in close, whispering in my ear so only I could hear, "Don't make a scene." I nodded slightly, more out of shock than agreement. I forced a smile, though every muscle in my body wanted to break down. My parents exchanged worried looks, but I shook my head at them, silently asking them not to press further. I couldn't face the humiliation of the entire wedding falling apart right in front of all those people. For the rest of the night, I moved like a shadow. I posed for pictures, I greeted guests, I even cut the cake, but I felt empty inside. My friends asked if I was okay, and I lied with a quiet, "Yes, I'm fine." I didn't want anyone to see how broken I truly was. On the outside, I played the role of a happy bride. On the inside, my heart was shattered. I felt like I had been tied to a man I didn't recognize anymore. The world saw us as newlyweds, but I already felt like a prisoner. The night dragged on until the last guest left, and I was left with the man who had humiliated me in front of everyone I loved. That was when the real weight of it began to sink in. Our honeymoon was supposed to be the fresh start after the strange and painful wedding night. I told myself it would get better once it was just the two of us, away from the judging eyes of everyone we knew. I hoped that maybe Ryan would apologize in private, admit he had gone too far, and try to make things right. But the truth was, it only got worse. The first day should have been magical. The hotel was beautiful, the ocean stretched out in front of us, and I wanted to believe the trip could heal what had already been broken. Instead, Ryan hardly spoke to me. He acted distant, scrolling through his phone, ordering me around like I was there to serve him. When I finally tried to bring up what had happened at the wedding, his face hardened. He laughed bitterly and said, "You're still upset about that? God, you're too sensitive." His words stung more than the act itself. It was clear he didn't feel sorry, not even a little. He turned the blame on me, making me feel weak for having emotions. The rest of that day, I stayed quiet, not wanting to fight. I walked beside him along the beach, sat across from him at dinner, and laid next to him at night, but I had never felt more alone. As the days passed, his behavior grew sharper. He started picking at little things, almost as if he enjoyed seeing me uncomfortable. If I dressed up for dinner, he'd scoff and say, "That outfit makes you look desperate." If I wore something casual, he'd shake his head and call me lazy. No matter what I did, it wasn't good enough. He also began taking my phone, scrolling through my messages, asking who each person was. If I laughed at something my best friend sent, he would accuse me of hiding something. I had never given him a reason not to trust me, but he acted like I was guilty of crimes I hadn't even thought of. When I asked him to stop, he brushed me off, saying, "A wife doesn't need secrets from her husband." The man I married seemed more like a warden than a partner. Every moment with him was filled with tension, as if I had to measure every word and action to avoid setting him off. I tried to push down the growing dread, telling myself marriage was supposed to be hard work, but deep inside I knew this wasn't normal. Our honeymoon should have been full of laughter, romance, and memories we could hold on to for a lifetime. Instead, it felt like a cage. I was surrounded by beauty, the ocean, the sunsets, the soft sand, but none of it mattered. The person beside me turned every bright moment into darkness. And that was when I began to understand. The nightmare I thought had started at the wedding was only just beginning. Weeks passed after the honeymoon, and instead of things improving, Ryan became harsher. His words cut deeper each day, and his temper flared more often. At first, I tried to excuse it as stress from work or the adjustment to being married, but it was clear his behavior was intentional. He began criticizing me in front of others, no matter where we were. At the grocery store, if I picked the wrong brand, he would roll his eyes and say loudly, "Do you ever think before you do things?" At dinners with friends, if I tried to share an opinion, he would interrupt and mock me, turning my thoughts into a joke for others to laugh at. I'd sit there in silence, cheeks burning, pretending it didn't bother me, but inside, I was breaking. At home, the pattern continued. Ryan expected everything to be done his way. He wanted me to cook exactly when he was hungry, clean even if I had worked all day, and drop whatever I was doing the moment he called my name. If I was tired, he'd call me lazy. If I said I needed rest, he'd accuse me of being dramatic. I felt like nothing I did would ever be enough for him. The loneliness grew heavier. I thought marriage meant partnership, but with Ryan, it felt like servitude. He didn't ask me how my day was or care about my dreams. He only wanted control. I kept my head down, convincing myself that maybe this was just what marriage looked like, but in my heart, I knew it wasn't right. One afternoon, I met with my best friend Sarah. She had known me for years and could see through my forced smile. Over coffee, she asked, "Emily, are you okay? You don't look like yourself anymore." For the first time, I let some of the truth slip out. I told her about his sharp words, the way he dismissed me, and how he treated me like I was beneath him. Sarah didn't hesitate. She put her hand on mine and said firmly, "This isn't love, it's abuse. A husband is supposed to care for you, not tear you down." Her words hit me like a storm. I wanted to believe her, but admitting it out loud made everything feel heavier. I shook my head and whispered, "It's too soon. People will think I gave up too quickly. They'll say I should have tried harder." My chest tightened as I thought about the whispers, the judgment, the shame of failing so soon after the vows. Sarah leaned closer and said, "No one who loves you will blame you. You don't deserve this." Her voice gave me comfort, but fear still held me back. Divorce after only weeks of marriage felt like admitting defeat. I wasn't ready for that step, even though deep down, I already knew the truth. Ryan wasn't going to change. The cracks in our marriage weren't small. They were the beginning of something far more destructive. The breaking point came during a family gathering at Ryan's parents' house. I had been dreading the evening, but I convinced myself to go, hoping maybe he would treat me better around his family. For the first part of the night, I stayed quiet, helping in the kitchen and making small talk with his relatives. I tried to keep the peace, even though I felt tense the whole time. It didn't take long for things to unravel. While everyone was moving dishes to the table, Ryan snapped at me for being too slow. In front of everyone, he shoved me out of his way and muttered loudly, "You're useless." The room fell silent. My cheeks burned, and I felt a sting of humiliation sharper than anything else I had felt before. His words echoed in my head, but what hurt even more was the look on his family's faces. I expected at least one person to defend me. I thought maybe his father would say something, or a sibling would call him out. But the only voice that spoke up was his mother's, and it wasn't in my favor. She shook her head, gave a small laugh, and said, "That's just how Ryan is." Her words cut me to the core. She dismissed his behavior as if it were nothing more than a bad habit. In that moment, I realized there would never be support from his family. They had accepted his cruelty as normal, and they expected me to do the same. No one asked if I was okay, no one tried to comfort me, and no one told him he was wrong. I was alone in a room full of people. The rest of the evening dragged on painfully. I forced myself to sit at the dinner table, though my appetite was gone. Ryan carried on with his stories, laughing with his sibling, pretending nothing had happened. Every time I looked at him, my stomach turned. I stayed silent, staring at my plate, holding back tears that threatened to spill. When we finally got home, I excused myself and went straight to the bathroom. I shut the door, turned on the light, and stared into the mirror. My reflection looked hollow, my eyes dull, and my shoulders slumped. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My heart ached, and my throat tightened as tears finally fell. Through shaky breaths, I whispered to myself, "I deserve better." The words came out soft, but they carried a power I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, I admitted the truth out loud. I wasn't weak for wanting more. I wasn't wrong for expecting respect. That night, I didn't sleep much. While Ryan snored beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, quietly planning. I knew leaving wouldn't be easy, but I also knew staying meant losing myself completely. It was the first step toward escape, the moment where fear began to turn into determination. After the night at Ryan's parents' house, something inside me changed. I no longer hoped he would become better, and I no longer believed his cruelty was temporary. Instead, I accepted the truth. He would never change, and if I stayed, I would lose myself completely. But I also knew I couldn't just walk out with nothing. Ryan was clever, and he had a way of twisting stories so others believed him. If I left suddenly, he would spin the narrative and make me look like the problem. I needed a plan, one that would protect me and expose him for who he really was. I began quietly collecting evidence. Whenever he sent cruel messages, I saved them. Whenever he called me names or belittled me in texts, I made sure they were backed up. I learned to keep my phone hidden so he wouldn't notice. I even recorded some of his outbursts at home, capturing the venom in his voice when he thought no one else could hear. Each file felt like a piece of armor, building my protection for the day I would finally confront him. Sarah became my lifeline during this time. She had seen enough to know what was happening, and she agreed to document the moments when Ryan embarrassed me in front of others. Her written accounts, along with my own evidence, formed a timeline of his behavior that couldn't be denied. Having her support gave me courage, but I still knew this wasn't something I could rush. One afternoon, while Ryan was at work, I met with a lawyer in secret. Sitting in the small office, I laid out my story piece by piece, my hands trembling as I spoke. The lawyer listened carefully, then explained my rights and what steps I could take to protect myself. Hearing that I had options gave me a glimmer of hope I hadn't felt in. I wasn't trapped, not legally and not personally. The chains I felt were emotional, but slowly, I was unlocking them. Still, I decided not to act right away. Leaving in silence would mean Ryan might escape accountability, and part of me wanted him to face consequence, not just lose me quietly. I wanted him to feel the weight of his actions, to be exposed in front of others just as he had exposed me. That thought gave me strength, so I stayed quiet. I played the role of the obedient wife, smiling when I had to, keeping my head down, and letting him believe he still held all the power. Inside, though, I was no longer broken. I was waiting, watching, and preparing. Every insult, every cruel word he threw at me only added fuel to the fire I was building. My plan was simple: remain silent until the right moment arrived. Then, when the time came, I would strike in a way that he could never ignore, in a way that would strip him of the control he held so proudly. The game had shifted, and he didn't even know it. Months passed, and Ryan remained convinced he had full control over me. He carried on as if nothing was wrong, confident that I would never stand up to him. What he didn't know was that I had been waiting for the perfect moment. That chance came when he decided to host a large dinner at a private hall. He invited his family, close friends, and several business partners. His goal was to show off, to paint the picture of a man with a thriving career and a flawless marriage. On the day of the event, I dressed carefully, not for him but for myself. I looked in the mirror and reminded myself of the strength I had gathered over the months. I walked in at his side, smiling politely, keeping up the act as though everything between us was fine. He introduced me proudly, shaking hands with his colleagues, as if I were a trophy he owned. I stayed quiet, knowing what was about to happen. Dinner went smoothly at first. Ryan raised his glass and boasted about his success, about how stable and happy his life was. He spoke about discipline, loyalty, and respect, using those words like weapons to build his false image. People nodded along, impressed, while I sat silently, waiting for the right opening. When Ryan finally turned toward me and said, "And of course, none of this would be possible without my wife," the moment arrived. I stood slowly, my heart steady, and looked around the room. The faces staring back at me were warm, unsuspecting, and ready to hear me echo his praises. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small recorder. "I've stayed quiet long enough," I said evenly, my voice calm but strong. "Since Ryan wants to show you all what kind of husband he is, let me help." I pressed play, and the room filled with Ryan's own words. The insults, the mocking, the venom he had thrown at me behind closed doors. The laughter died instantly. His business partners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, brows furrowing as the recordings revealed who he truly was. His family sat in stunned silence, some covering their mouths, others glaring at him with disbelief. Ryan's face turned red, his composure crumbling as the mask he wore shattered in front of everyone. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I let his voice condemn him. When the recording ended, I set the device on the table and looked around the room. "This is the man behind the smile," I said softly. One by one, his business partners pushed back their chairs and his father shook his head in disgust, and even his siblings looked too ashamed to meet his eyes. Ryan tried to speak, stammering excuses, but no one listened. I didn't wait for his reaction. I stood tall, lifted my chin, and walked out. For the first time in months, I felt free. The power he once held over me was gone, stripped away by nothing more than the truth. After that dinner, Ryan's perfect image crumbled. The man who once strutted with confidence now looked desperate. At first, he tried to win me back. He called, sent flowers, and begged for forgiveness. His messages were filled with promises to change, with words like, "I'll do better," and "We can fix this." But I had heard enough empty words to last a lifetime. I stayed silent, letting his pleas wash over me without a response. When begging didn't work, his tone shifted. He started sending threats, accusing me of destroying his life. He warned me that I would regret leaving him, that no one else would ever want me, that I would end up alone. The switch from desperate charm to bitter rage only proved I had made the right choice. I ignored him and focused on the next step, making the separation final. With the help of my lawyer, I filed for divorce. The case moved quickly, and Ryan was furious. He tried to intimidate me with angry calls and long messages, but I had already prepared. Every insult, every controlling word, every piece of evidence I had saved was organized and ready. The day we went to court, Ryan showed up looking sharp, acting as though he still had the upper hand. He tried to smile, but I could see the panic in his eyes. His family sat behind him, whispering nervously. On my side, Sarah and my parents were there for support, their presence steadying me as I walked in. When it was my turn to speak, I stayed calm and clear. I presented the texts, the recordings, and Sarah's statements. Piece by piece, I laid out the truth. The judge listened carefully, eyes narrowing as Ryan's behavior unfolded through his own words. Every insult played aloud was another blow to the mask he had worn for so long. Ryan tried to deny it, raising his voice, claiming I was exaggerating, but the evidence was undeniable. His outbursts in court only made him look worse, showing the same temper he had always hidden behind closed doors. His lawyer struggled to contain the damage, but nothing could erase what had already been revealed. By the end, the judgment was clear. The divorce was granted in my favor. Ryan lost not only the case, but also a significant amount of money in the settlement. His reputation, once polished, was ruined. Business partners who had once respected him now kept their distance, and his family couldn't defend him anymore. I walked out of the courthouse with my head high, the same woman who had once been humiliated in front of 300 guests, but now stronger than ever. Ryan, the man who thought he could break me, stood disgraced and powerless. For the first time, the weight I had carried for so long was gone, replaced by freedom and rely. After the divorce was finalized, I packed my things and moved into a small apartment on. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was mine, and for the first time in a long while, I felt safe. I could close the door and know there would be no shouting, no insults, no fear of what might happen next. The silence of that little space brought me peace, and every morning I woke up feeling lighter. With Ryan gone from my life, I slowly began to rebuild. I poured myself into my career, chasing goals I had put aside for years. The long hours didn't feel like a burden anymore. They felt like progress, like proof that I could stand on my own. I applied for opportunities one once thought were out of reach, and with every small success, my confidence grew. For the first time, I was living for myself and not for someone else's approval. I also reconnected with friends I had drifted away from during my marriage. Ryan had always kept me isolated, making me feel guilty for spending time with anyone but him. Now, I reached out to people I had missed, and one by one, they welcomed me back with open arms. Coffee dates turned into long conversations, laughter returned to my life, and the loneliness that once consumed me began to fade. Sarah remained my closest support, always reminding me how far I had come. She celebrated every step with me, whether it was signing the lease for my apartment, landing a new project at work, or simply smiling more than I used to. My parents were also by my side, proud to see me standing tall again. They had worried so much, and now their relief showed in every hug, every encouraging word. Little by little, I found my voice again. The timid woman who once stayed silent to avoid conflict was gone. I spoke up in meetings, made decisions for myself, and carried myself with a strength I didn't even know I had. The scars from the past were still there, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they became reminders of what I had survived and how strong I had become. Nights that used to feel endless and heavy were now filled with peace. I cooked for myself, played music, lit candles, and enjoyed the quiet without fear of criticism. Freedom didn't feel lonely, it felt healing. For the first time in years, I felt safe, loved, and strong. I realized I didn't need Ryan, or anyone like him, to complete me. I had everything I needed within myself. Surrounded by people who truly cared for me, I could finally breathe without fear, dream without limits, and live without chains. My life was my own again, and I was determined never to let anyone take that from me. Months later, I was invited to a wedding at the very same venue where mine had taken place. Walking through those doors brought back memories I thought would hurt, but instead, I felt calm. I wasn't the broken woman who had stood there in silence on her wedding day. I was stronger now, and I carried myself with pride. As I entered the hall, I noticed people glancing in my direction. I could hear the whispers, "That's the bride who was kicked." But the tone was different this time. Instead of pity, their eyes showed surprise. They saw me smiling, radiant, dressed beautifully, and surrounded by friends. I wasn't the same girl they remembered from that humiliating day. I was someone new, someone free and thriving. The music played, the celebration went on, and for the first time in that building, I actually enjoyed myself. I laughed with my friends, danced without fear, and felt the kind of joy that came from surviving something dark and finding light again. Every step I took across that floor reminded me that pain had not destroyed me. It had built me into someone unshakable. Then, as the evening went on, a familiar figure stumbled into the room. It was Ryan. He looked nothing like the proud groom he once pretended to be. His clothes were wrinkled, his face tired, and his eyes dull with alcohol. Alone and unsteady, he tried to make his way toward me. For a moment, the room grew tense. People turned their heads, watching as he pushed forward. Some gasped, some whispered, but I stood still. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I felt nothing but calm. Before he could reach me, security stepped in. They blocked his path and quickly escorted him out of the hall. His protests were slurred and meaningless. The same man who once humiliated me in front of 300 guests was now the one being dragged away in shame. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't even give him a glance as he was taken outside. My silence was louder than any words I could have shouted. I didn't need revenge through anger or confrontation. My life itself was proof that I had already won. As the doors closed behind him, I turned back to the celebration. I smiled, lifted my glass, and carried on dancing. The people who had once pitied me now admired the strength I carried. They could see the truth without me saying a single word. That night, I realized something powerful. He had kicked me on our wedding day, thinking he would always have control over me. But the real shock wasn't his cruelty. It was how his cruelty pushed me higher than he could ever reach. And that, in the end, was the sweetest revenge.